Welcome everyone to Los Hijos del Rol for this new episode of StoryAlways, in which we have the great pleasure of having with us Craig Campbell. Hi Craig, how are you?
I'm good, Angel. Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. A quick introduction for people who don't know him. Craig is the creator of NerdBurger Games, a company, and he's the award-winning designer of games such as Models and Acquisitions, Capers, Die Laughing, and a lot of smallish little games, a lot of really cool small games. And his next project is going to be Cape Noir, uh,
Noir, yeah.
Noir. Yeah, it took a yeah. Who's going to go on Kickstarter? When exactly? Can you
That's going to
remember?
be on March 12th.
Nice. And
That's a
he's
Tuesday.
cool. And he's also the host of the NerdBurger podcast. And I'm forgetting anything else? Anything you want to add to your own biography that I have forgotten?
No, that gets us where we need to be to get started. Sure.
Cool. So, as a reminder to everyone on the chat, if you have any question during the interview, feel free to leave the questions on the chat, and I'll do my best to bring them to Craig. And also, if you want to support the show, the channel, you can either subscribe to our Twitch channel and pay like a monthly subscription. Even you can do it for free if you have Amazon Prime lying around and you're not using it, or you can give us a one-time donation through our coffee page, which we also have somewhere in underneath the screen in the description on the Twitch channel. Somewhere there. So, yeah, exactly. Uh, and also, I'll just send the links to everything, ready to Craig in a moment. So to begin with, since today we are not going to be talking about a specific game, although we'll be touching mainly of a few. I thought we could start kind of covering the basics of, for example, how did you get into RPGs? Kind of to get a
Oh.
feeling of your experience.
I played my first RPG. It was D&D, not surprising. And actually, it was a Ravenloft game. My freshman year, second semester of college. So I never got into it as a kid or in high school. I came very close. I knew some people that played it at the time, and we just never got around to doing it. So it was college. I played in a Ravenloft game like right before the summer break. And then I went and bought the books and devoured them over the summer and came back and started playing with different people and, all through college. And then that just kind of progressed all the way up to now. And that was, close to 30 years ago that started. And there came a point where, maybe 15 or so, 16 years ago. Oh, geez, actually, it's probably closer to 20. 18 or 19 years ago, I got the opportunity to write a little something for Living Greyhawk back with third edition D&D. When that first came out and they started Living Greyhawk, they had all those, all the adventures that you could go and play at conventions. And I got a chance to write something for that because a friend of mine was an organizer. And that kind of kicked off into the freelancing thing and getting me where I'm at. But that's kind of where the gaming started. And there was a lot of there was a decade of just nothing but actually playing before I got the chance to design anything. A lot of D&D. We played quite a lot of Star Wars, the old West End games, the D6 system. That is making a comeback. Did you see that? There's what game is I can't remember. There's a game that's starting right now that's using that system. They've revived that
Really?
system. Yeah, it's not for Star Wars. It's something else. And if it pops into my head, I'll mention it. But I was just thrilled to see that system because it was a cool system. It worked really well. And then played like some of the original World of Darkness stuff, Vampire and Mage and Changeling and all that. And then goofy stuff like Toon. Played some Shadowrun. It was all over the place.
Yeah, Tune is like surprisingly like it was very forward thinking for the time, I believe.
Oh yeah, it was really out of the ordinary because all the games at the time were. This was like back when, for the most part, like the first run of RPGs were like action adventure kind of they're adventure stories of different sorts. And then like White Wolf came along and started doing vampire, and they had these kind of darker, moody, political, deep drama kind of things. And then Toon, where you just played a cartoon, where you could just run around and do crazy cartoon stuff. And if you got bonked in the head or got smashed flat, it was just like Wile E. Coyote. It's like you were just out of the scene for a little while, and then you came walking back in, and everything was fine. I still miss that game. I want to play it again.
Yeah, I've heard many people like talk about that game as like an early, I don't know, story game or whatever you want to call it, like something really different for the time.
Yeah, it was very light. It was not a rules heavy game. It was all about just being fun and funny.
And were those kind of like your main were those kind of the most influential games for you at the time, kind of for your later work? Were those where you got your first contact with RPGs, and how did they influence you?
I think D&D influenced me quite a lot. That was the game I played the most, and not surprising again. And I had a lot of friends that played it, and I ran games, I played in games. We all shared around. There's like this group of about 15 of us that just kind of like over the course of my college years, there were these people and these people, and we kind of mixed a little bit. And sometimes one person would run, and sometimes somebody else. And we'd play in all the different worlds of second edition, and then eventually third edition. And so D&D definitely influenced me. And when I started freelancing, that's what I mostly freelanced. So because I just kind of knew that game so well, it was easier. There are certainly things in some of those early games that have influenced the design work that I've been doing. Not to jump ahead, but just to touch on it briefly, Capers uses no dice. It uses all playing cards. And that kind of came out of my love of the game Deadlands. Which doesn't use just playing cards. There's dice in it, but it uses playing cards quite a bit. They play into the mechanics quite a bit, and I really like I like that feel for Deadlands. Like the outlaws playing poker around the table in the saloon. So using cards and poker hands for some things was kind of cool. And so when I moved into Capers, I decided, okay, I've done all this. I've done plenty of dice, and there's all sorts of different dice systems out there. So I'll try to do something with cards. So that certainly influenced it. And I think that I do love comedy games, funny games. And that came, that influenced later with making Die Laughing, which is a horror comedy sort of game. And comedy is tough. It's hard to bake comedy into a game because you kind of need the people playing the game to be funny. You can set up some funny situations, and you can let the text of the game be funny, and it can be a funny read. But it can be, that's a little tougher to bake in there. So I mean, I think those early games, they influenced to some extent, although I've gone, into some very different directions than any of the games that I previously played.
And you mentioned that at the beginning you did mostly work for other companies, especially for D&D. How was your experience with that? How did you find working for them?
Working for Wizards of the Coast was a great experience overall. I had a very good experience with it. It was, I did a little bit of Living Greyhawk, and then I did a couple things for Dragon Magazine when that was still a pre-publication. And then there was a point where I got laid off of my day job, and I had all this extra time. I was like, and I could use a little money. And so I hit up a few people that I knew in the industry. My name just kind of got passed to some other people, and I started writing stuff for fourth edition, for a little bit of RPGA stuff. If you remember the RPGA, the Role Playing Gamers Association, it was the overall organization that took care of all the living campaigns. Like if you played Living Forgotten Realms or Living Greyhawk at conventions, the RPGA oversaw all of that. So I wrote adventures for them, and then I started writing content for fourth edition D&D, starting with stuff that was just like free content on the website, and eventually doing stuff for Dungeon and Dragon Online, when they made the magazines digital. So I did quite a bit for Dragon and Dungeon Online. I've a great time. I mean, I worked a lot with. We all know the name Chris Perkins.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the top fellows at D&D R&D. Chris, I worked with him quite a bit. Chris is a great guy. I had a couple of different editors over there and developers that I worked with that I learned a lot from. They taught me a lot about how to, make a cool adventure, make it good and interesting and evocative, how to design a good monster, and make it interesting and fun to play, and fun to kill. Yeah, it was a good experience.
And how did you kind of transition? I mean, I don't know if you let it completely behind, but how did you transition into doing your own work and kind of as an independent publisher? And how was the experience setting all those kind of things?
Well, I was doing all that freelancing for 4th edition D&D, and I did like a little something here and there for a couple other companies, and my D&D work started to dry up because I was doing mostly stuff for the digital magazines, and they were starting to ramp that down. And this was at the point where behind the scenes they were playtesting 5th edition in-house. They were starting to get toward 5th edition, and so they were starting to rein in a lot of their content because they had to put the manpower into making the new game. I was actually on the hook. I was going to be able to contribute to a physical book. There was me and 3 others, and we were going to do a monster book. That never happened because, in retrospect, that is when 5th edition was getting going. So I think they canceled that book, and they probably canceled a few other projects when they decided to go to 5th edition. So everything sort of dried up and went away. And I said, okay, I can start looking around for other things and hope that I can get back into doing some D&D stuff later. And just talk to other companies and games and see what I can find. Or I can go ahead and say, there's Kickstarter and there's Drive-Thru RPG and PDF games and print on demand, and it's never been easier to make your own game. And I'll take a stab at it. So I started working on Murders and Acquisitions, and my freelancing kind of wrapped up a little bit as I was doing that, and I just kind of hunkered down and made a game. And put it on Kickstarter and managed to get it funded and published, and here we are.
So let's talk a little bit about Murders and Acquisitions. Just briefly, what's the game about?
Murders and Acquisitions is about climbing your way up the corporate ladder by whatever means necessary in sort of an over-the-top, absurd corporate world. So think of, any movie that has like cutthroat corporate politics. Now ramp that up by about times 10. Like everybody's out to get everybody else. There's backstabbing. People are finding ways to get people sued, to get their reputations destroyed, to push them down an elevator shaft, whatever it takes to get to the corner office. And so that's the game. It's very tongue in cheek. There's a lot of humor kind of built into it. It's meant to be kind of a little bit of a poke at United States corporate culture, with a lot of exaggeration and things. And the core game is set like that. And then there's a number of chapters in the game that have additional add-on rules so that you can get some more fantastic stuff in there. So you can actually take like the modern day world of the corporate thing and add magic and monsters and have sort of an urban fantasy type of thing where there might be a dragon that sits on the board of directors, or a vampire that works real late. And there's a couple of other chapters that do that sort of thing too. So you can kind of mix and match and create a lot of different worlds based on our own.
Where did the idea for that game came from? Did that come from like real experience, or did you have like a non-disclosure agreement that you cannot say anything about?
Nothing like that. Everybody, I get that question a lot. Do you work in an office? Is that where you got that from? Yes, I do work in an office, but I have generally had very positive experiences where I've worked for the most part. It actually came from a friend of mine who I worked with for a while, and he pitched the idea. And he knew I was a game, I was doing freelancing and I was into games, and he pitched an idea of a game. He's like, hey, what about this as a game? And what he described was essentially Murders and Acquisitions, but he kind of framed it as a board game. And the way he described it, it felt very much like you could take the game Munchkin and just skin it over, and instead of having adventurers and monsters, you would have, you know, corporate executives and office workers and so forth, and you're backstabbing each other and working your way up the ladder. But you know, I did RPGs. That's where I wasn't a board game person. I like board games, but I wasn't, you know, ever designing them. And so I asked him, I said, do you mind if I try to turn that into a role-playing game? And he said, go for it, because, you know, it was just an idea he thought would be interesting to talk to me about. He doesn't design stuff. It's just, so he's in the credits. He's in the special thanks section of the credits in the book. And he's been one of my, he's a good friend, and he's been one of my most ardent supporters. He's always talking me up.
And how did you kind of manage that kind of, well, first of all, the question would be, in the game, do the players kind of are kind of like people who are competing with each other, or are they kind of part of some kind of team or something like that?
The assumption in the game is that the group is actually like they're working together, and it's presented as you can get to the top, but you need somebody to watch your back. Because there's always people that are kind of coming after you as well. So it presents the idea that you do kind of form an alliance to get yourself all, you know, moving up the ladder. Now, that said, there's nothing wrong with backstabbing your coworkers and your friends. And there's actually even like a subset of rules, an optional rule set in there that you can use to screw around with the other people in your group and gain benefits from embarrassing them or causing them to fail. You get some benefit out of it, but then they can do it right back to you too. So it's a lot of back and forth. And of course, if you want to, you know, just literally backstab, you know, and there's a combat system, and you can go ahead and let the dice fall, see what happens.
So that was kind of your first big project. How was your experience with like getting that project to completion with the, I imagine, Kickstarter and getting into print, all that?
Kickstarter is a lot of work. I spent a year basically, as Murders and Acquisitions was kind of getting to the end stages, and I felt like it was getting complete, I started researching Kickstarter. So I started backing more Kickstarters that were like mine. That is, you know, like small scale RPGs. I wanted to see how different smaller RPGs did things. I started going back and looking at old Kickstarters. I went on Facebook groups and talked to people at, you know, there's advice groups for how to run Kickstarters and how to do tabletop games on Kickstarter and so forth. And I spent a year just kind of absorbing all of that while I was getting while I was getting Murders and Acquisitions finalized. And then I kicked off that Kickstarter, and it was an experience. It took a few days to get. I had a very low funding goal. It was real simple. I was like, I'm going to place my funding goal at kind of the bare minimum I need to make like the thinnest version of the game I can, so I can hit a funding goal and at least do something. And then stretch goals made the book bigger and added some of that optional and additional stuff. And so I got it funded inside of 3 days, which isn't too bad. And you know, the Kickstarter ran for a month. It was nerve-wracking, but we hit the stretch goals. We got the book as big as it was going to get. I got like 250 some backers, you know, and I've sold some on Drive-Thru RPG and at conventions since. It was a great learning experience. Do I consider it a great game? It has its fun points. There's some good stuff about it. But I think the stuff that I've done since then is probably, you know, better as far as game design and world and everything. But it was a great learning experience. It was nerve-wracking at times, and but ultimately rewarding.
And I guess that will lead us to talk about Capers, which is, if I get the chronology right, that will be the kind of next game you did, and I would say kind of your main game at this point, I would say. If that's
you could call it the flagship game.
That sounds better, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, same thing. Could you give us a quick pitch about Capers?
Capers is a superpowered role-playing game of gangsters in the Roaring '20s. So think about Boardwalk Empire on HBO. Think about there's a variety of your older old black and white gangster movies. The movie The Untouchables with Costner and everybody. Think about that era, but the gangsters and the coppers have superpowers, like street level kind of, like they can do some cool stuff, but nobody's mind controlling an entire city or anything ridiculous. So it's kind of mid to low end superpowers. And then within that world, that's just a thing that has started to happen. People are popping up that have these abilities, and in the game you play either gangsters or members of law enforcement. If you're playing gangsters, you're out to build your criminal empire and get rich and enjoy that lifestyle. And if you're a member of law enforcement, you are struggling to try to bring crime under control, because when alcohol was outlawed in the United States during Prohibition in the 20s, the federal and local law enforcement were not at all ready to deal with the amount of illegal alcohol that was going to start happening, because criminals started making and importing and distributing alcohol illegally and got rich really fast because everybody wants a drink. So you can play it either way. It's set in that world then too, and it's kind of generically in the 20s. It's not a specific year. It's kind of you can play with the period of history a little bit.
So I guess the first question is, where did the idea, or why did you wanted to make a game that was kind of in that intersection of the Roaring '20s and superpowers? What did you find interesting about that particular class of genres?
Well, with Mergers and Acquisition, I had all these little add-on things like magic and monsters and stuff. So I wanted to do something different, and Supers was something I hadn't done with Mergers and Acquisition. So I thought, okay, well, what about Supers? There's all sorts of Supers games out there. People love Supers games, but there's a lot of them. And a lot of them are kind of set modern day, classic, primary colors, superheroes, supervillains, duking it out in the streets. And so I thought I should try to do something that has a little bit of a twist, something that's a little different. So I started looking at periods in history, because I figured I'm going to have to research a period in history in order to make this happen. And I was literally watching Boardwalk Empire, and I was like, yep, there we go. Gangsters. Gangsters is something that's not done a lot in RPGs, and I think a superpower twist on that could be a lot of fun. I got to research the 1920s and watch Boardwalk Empire again. So it was fun from the not just designing the game and the story setting and everything, but then just getting to research a really interesting period in American history that is unlike anything else in American history. When alcohol was illegal, and for 13 years or 12 years or whatever it was, and the whole country changed because of it. Like criminal or organized crime blew up. It got huge. There was organized crime before Prohibition, but Prohibition exploded organized crime.
Yeah, my understanding is that kind of one of the reasons that I breed out the smaller, weakest criminals, and only the big, tough guys were left, and they become really, really huge.
Yeah, and then Prohibition ends, and it's an interesting period after that too, because now all of a sudden you have these criminal empires with all these people working for them, and they're all expecting to keep getting rich, and they want that money coming in, but all of a sudden they've got this, alcohol is taken away from them, and you go back through history, look it up online. There's documentaries about some of that stuff to see what all the kind of strange things that criminals did in order to try to get another revenue stream back once alcohol was legal again. My favorite, just to sidetrack, it has nothing to do with capers. Okay. One of my favorites is that Hollywood was getting big. And movie theaters and what they called movie palaces. Going to the theater for a movie was a big deal, and everybody went. It was a very very regular occurrence. And at the time, the projectionist was a highly skilled person. The person who operates the projector to keep this, to put the picture and the sound on the screen, not just anybody can do that. And so the organized crime would go in and basically grab the projectionist and shake down the theater, saying, if you don't pay us protection money, and it's racketeering, that something's going to happen to your projectionist. And if you lose your projectionist, or if people don't want to work for you, that's it. The theater's done. I mean, it has nothing else. You need the projectionist. So they literally turn to a racketeering shakedown of the projectionist. And they would threaten projectionists' families to force their employers to pay money to the mob.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a really interesting part of history. So you take this kind of interesting, complicated period of American history, and you add superpowers on top of it. How does it change? What kind of how does it change things? What way is it different?
Well, it changes the power dynamic to the extent that now you've got superpowered people and people that aren't. And the superpowered people are not so superpowered that, a Tommy gun can't hurt them. I mean, in the game, a Tommy gun is still pretty deadly. But there's a mystique that surrounds them. They become in the game world, they're sort of the tabloid superstars. They're the rock stars, newspapers and magazines write stories about them and exaggerate those stories. So there are people that are really enamored of the public. Some people are like, oh, wow. They're like, this is really interesting and wonderful. And then there's people who are, think that they're like of the devil, that these are abominations. So it changes it. There's all these different dynamics can take place with your NPCs and how your characters are portrayed. In the game, I decided to take things like race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, so forth, and kind of strip out the bad parts, so to speak, of the world, because I wanted the game to be welcoming to anybody who wants to play it. I want, a black lesbian woman who opens up the book and says, oh, hey, this game is for me. Look, there's people that I can identify with. There's interesting characters who are female and who are homosexual and so forth. And so I kind of downplayed that, and then instead, the reaction that the general populace has to something that's different is in the capers, in the superpowered people. And it's not really heavy-handed about it, but it does talk about how people, regular people, kind of view the capers in different ways. And then as I move this timeline of the game forward, and we'll get there eventually here, people's attitudes toward the superpowered people changes as the story moves forward.
Yeah, that could be a really interesting evolution of kind of the way the society deals with them, and an interesting and an easy way, kind of like X-Men, were a way to exploring, I think, especially prejudices against gay people and queer people back in the day. That it's not without precedent using superpowers for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, superpower. Many of your comic books, especially like X-Men, are very much about that. X-Men is an allegory for. Pick your marginalized group.
Well,
it's an allegory for racial discrimination, for misogyny and chauvinism, for persecution against queer people and homosexual people. It's all of that. My game is still very much an action adventure kind of telefon story kind of game, but the groundwork is there to play. If you want to play the superpowered character as the other and how society treats the other, you could certainly hit on that in the game a little bit if you wanted to. You could have hateful NPCs that cause problems because those people are different than us. You can do that. I didn't bake it into the game, but you can certainly play it.
So, talking about the design of the game, the system itself, you mentioned before that the system uses cards instead of dice. Uh, why did you decide to use them? Although you to talk a little bit more about that before, and how does it change the gameplay? What does it change? What does it allow you to do as a designer that's interesting for the game?
Well, real quickly, how the card mechanic works is whenever you're attempting something, you'll have a trait or a power check to make, and you'll have multiple cards that you can flip. And the number of cards you have is called your card count, and it may be a high number, it may be a low number, and you'll be able to flip one card at a time, attempting to succeed. The pip value on the card, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to ace high, that determines success or failure. So you might need a 10 or better to succeed. But the suit of the card determines the degree of success or failure. So, and it works clubs alphabetically up to spades. Clubs is always the worst. Spades is always the best. So you could flip a high card that's going to be successful, but get clubs as a suit, which means it's barely successful and there's a complication that comes with it. And then you can stick with that card and take the complication, or flip another card and hope you get a better result, but you might fail by flipping that other card. So every trait check becomes like a little gambling game. You're pressing your luck each time. And the thing that I discovered the most with a few things with the mechanics is that, first of all, it's surprisingly engaging. And because you're not, when you roll dice, it's like you roll the dice. Okay, I got a 16. I add 5. I got a 21. What does that mean? And you move on. Whereas with the cards, you flip a card, and you have to make a choice. And everybody's waiting for you to make that choice. And you decide you're going to flip another card, and now you have another choice until you run out of cards. And you may only have 3 cards that you can flip, and then you have to take that last one. And so there's a tension that's kind of in each of those checks. That it happens quickly, but there's a little bit of a tension. And then on top of it, you don't reshuffle your deck immediately. You might play for a little while and bleed through a bunch of your cards. So, there might come a point where you've flipped, and just random chance, the way it's worked out is you have flipped a lot of your low cards. And now what's left in my deck skews toward high cards, skews toward success. So I'm going to take more chances. I'm going to try riskier maneuvers. I'm going to try bigger things because I think I have a better chance of succeeding. And you can look through your discard pile and see what you previously flipped, so you can kind of count cards and keep track of it. And it changes the dynamic of how you're doing things until you reshuffle your deck back together, and now you're back to, you could draw any card. So there's a history that cards have, that they remember. You flip, that deck remembers. I flip these cards through. Okay, well, the King of Hearts and the King of Spades are out. I only have 2 kings left in this deck. The deck knows that, I know that, and I might change my play a little bit based on that.
So one of the other aspects of the game is how does it kind of portray this the kind of lives of the people during the area. One aspect I think is kind of just high, like you have to decide if you continue or not. You have to risk it, but there's also this element of, I guess, moral ambiguity that is kind of one important factor in the genre. How does the game kind of play with that?
The game actually, every character, you can play, criminals or cops, and every character has 3 what are in the game they're called anchors, which are basically role-playing guides. And one of them is your character's identity, which is kind of the core of who they are. And then every character has a virtue and a vice. And so even if you're playing a gangster, you have a virtue, and the game incentivizes you to engage in that virtue, to do that good thing. Even though you're playing a bad guy, you might be very, very honest, or might be someone who shares their money, and shares their good fortune. And so, in the game, there's a resource called Moxie, which is a point system that you use to do different things, and your Moxie goes up and down. You can regain Moxie by doing things that play to your virtue, or by suffering from your vice. So even if you're a good cop, even if you're playing a cop and you're generally good and you're out there to stop the criminals, you might be an alcoholic, or you might enjoy ladies of the evening, or you might be particularly angry and fall to your temper very easily. And so the game rewards you for embracing that. So even if you are a good guy, there's some bad stuff that the game wants you to kind of do. And if you're a bad guy, there's good stuff that the game kind of wants you to do.
And now that you mentioned that currency, the Moxie, how does it influence gameplay, and why did you decide to include it? What purpose does it serve for the game?
Well, Moxie is intended to be the flipping the cards. That's you're determining success and failure, but you're at the whim of the cards. And I wanted to give the players a little more agency to be able to do some things. So you have this pool of Moxie that goes up and down. You spend points, you gain points, and you can spend them on a number of things. And you can spend them to get an extra card to flip. You can spend them to prevent some damage to you. And you can spend them on non-game mechanics things. You can spend them to influence the narrative of the story a little bit, to add your own narrative elements. Nothing that's going to, solve the problem for you, but something that might be kind of a fun little thing that will help. You might have a character who's gone to a hotel to try to hunt somebody down, try to find him at the hotel, but the hotel's really large, and you tell the GM, "Can I spend a Moxie to say that my cousin works at the main desk of the hotel?" And the GM says, "Sure." And you spend a Moxie, and now you've got a contact at the hotel. You still have to convince your cousin to help you, and that might be easier than it would be to convince a stranger. So you're getting a little extra something out of it. And there's a bunch of other things that you can do with Moxie. So it's intended to just give you flexibility, and it. For people that really like the narrative thing, they can spend their Moxie all on narrative stuff. If people really just want more cards all the time and they want to kick ass in combat, they'll spend the Moxie to prevent damage and to gain bonuses in combat.
And that all being linked to the three aspects of the players, kind of like push them to invest into them and to bring them into play.
Yeah, that resource is not it's useful. It doesn't win the game for you, but it's very useful, and it's a shame if you forget about it. And so then all of the anchors that kind of guide your character, that's one of the best ways for you to get back, is to always make sure you're playing that character true to your form. And if if while you're playing, your character might change, and you might decide that they managed to overcome one vice, but then they get saddled with another one. So you could, if the GM's cool with it, you could switch vices partway through the story and have your character evolve a little bit.
Nice. And something else you mentioned is that, of course, criminals want to build like their criminal empire. How does the game handle that kind of progression in the world for the players, for the characters?
That's mostly in the GM's hands, because I didn't make the game specific to building like a big, you're not necessarily going to become the crime boss at the end. If you want to play that game, you can start the game as upstarts, and by the end of the game, you're all in charge of the crime family. But you could also play a game where you're just doing your thing, and maybe you're not part of a big organization. Maybe you're just a little outfit. So it's really a question of just like the GM, like in a lot of games where the GM will provide rewards that are appropriate to the type of game you want to play. So as you succeed at different things, you might get a whole big cash payout. You might steal a shipment of something. You might get an opportunity to get a speakeasy, and you have your own speakeasy and your own home base of operations, and that provides an income and all sorts of story possibilities by having people come into your speakeasy and try to bust up the joint, so that you can take. Or if you wanted to get political and have it be, I want to have our characters are going to influence the city's politics and get in bed with all the politicians and get rich that way. You could play that way too.
And talking about the GM, how does the game help the GM kind of handle things and manage the whole game?
The game book is half player information and half GM information, and
Mm,
Murders and Acquisitions is the same way. There's a lot of GM info, and so it's all the game. It's all the whole game in one book. You don't need to buy anything more. Um, and the GM section has a whole bunch of advice on running games, setting up encounters, how to deal with some of the unique things, how to invent new powers.
mm,
If the characters if you want to invent something for an NPC, or if the players want to invent a new power. And then it's got a whole bunch of tools that are kind of built in. There's multiple cities that are all written up as backdrops. A bunch of other cities that get like one page with just enough information to kind of get you going, get you started with that city. A whole bunch of NPCs that are statted out. Just like all the tools that a GM needs. Like you could literally just go through and say, okay, we're going to have a shoot 'em up, and then it's going to it's going to go off in this direction to steal a shipment, and okay, we'll take these NPCs and we'll put it in this city, and
mm.
off we go. And then there's adventures too you can buy.
Nice. Um, and a question related to that: what do you think it is? Where does the fun or for the GM comes from running the game, other than normal GM stuff? What's something the game is giving the GM that is kind of like going to be particularly fun and different?
I think that probably one of the more fun aspects of the game, and this applies to the players as well, but to the GM in particular, is because it's you're going to be playing in a world that not a lot of games hit on. There's not a lot of gangster-oriented kind of games out there, and then the supers twist that's in there. So you can take all of those, like if you've GM'd a lot of D&D, or if you've DM'd a lot of science fiction RPGs, you can take all the tropes, all the basic story elements that you made. Okay, well, we'll take this kind of a story and we'll wrap all this fantasy stuff into it, or we'll wrap all this sci-fi stuff into it. You can take that and wrap all this gangster stuff into it, and it will feel new and fresh and exciting, and it won't be like, oh, we're fighting the band of orcs again. Well, no, in the gang, in here, you're fighting a rival gang of bootleggers that one of them has superpowers, and then down the road, maybe as your characters get a little tougher and a little more savvy. Well, now there's this other gang of bootleggers that you're dealing with that are encroaching on your territory, and they have more superpowered characters, and they're tougher to deal with. Or there's a lot to be said for the setting being something that's out of the ordinary that the GM can have a lot of fun with.
Nice. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the coming Kickstarter for the expansion of the game. Capers Noir. That's when I got it for the first. Yeah. So why is it different? What new things brings to the game? What content is going to have?
Well, I decided, I'll take a stab at doing a supplement. Supplements are a hard sell because they're not going to sell as many copies as the core game. So you want to provide, enough stuff in the supplement to be enticing. And so I was like, well, you could do a supplement that is all just, okay, here's new character options and new powers and new rules. And that's great. And give new GM stuff and cool, some new interesting things for the GM to do. And that's great. But then that's just like, it's just more stuff. It's just more choices. So what Capers Noir is doing is it has all of that stuff that you could just get the supplement and just have more choices and more options for the Capers base game. But it also presents its own setting, and it moves the story forward from the 1920s in Prohibition to the 1940s and the World War II years. And it's not specifically set in World War II. It's not a war story. It's still a story about criminals and cops with superpowers. But it's now, it takes the approach of it's crime noir stories. So it's mysteries. It's moody. It's, a lot of people leaning against the lamppost, smoking a cigarette in the rain, and having a clandestine meeting with somebody that comes by to give them some information as they're trying to track down who the killer is. that sort of thing. And then I've kind of added on to that to play around with it. The idea that World War II has been so destructive,
Mm-hmm.
and there's been so much death and devastation, that the veil that exists between our world and the world of the dead, the land of the dead, has kind of thinned up a little bit, and things have started to creep over. So there's ghosts and revenants and poltergeists and some of these types of things. So you could potentially, those things have always been there in the world, but the idea is that they're more prevalent during this decade.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could have a mystery, for example, where your boss got killed, and the first witness you're going to question is your boss's ghost. What did they see right before it happened? And the boss might be helpful. The boss might be very, very angry. So you can take a lot of different directions. And so there's going to be a little bit of a kind of creepy horror element to it. So it's kind of horror noir with superpowers.
Cool.
Including superpowers like contact spirit and possession.
Nice. And just to remind spectators, when is that coming to Kickstarter?
That's coming to Kickstarter on Tuesday, March 12th. And that's it'll probably be about 9:00 in the morning Eastern time. So West Coast, by the time you get up, it'll be underway. Europe, it'll already be the afternoon. So hopefully we'll have a good solid first day. And it is a Tuesday, which is traditionally a good day for Kickstarters to start. So it's a relatively low funding goal. It's the book will be about, I think it's going to be about 56 pages.
Mm-hmm.
The backer level, the base backer level is going to be $10. That gets you a PDF and a discount link to buy the book at cost later. And the book only costs about $4. If once you strip out profit, it's just the cost to make the book. It's just what it costs to print and bind it, and then you got to pay for shipping, of course. So if you want a soft cover, you can get it super cheap as well. And there'll be options in the Kickstarter too for people who don't have Capers yet. The first game, they'll be able to get that, or they can get both. And I think there'll be a couple of other options as well. I'm still kind of hammering that all out. So if you're listening to this after March 12th, go take a look and see what I decided on, because I'm right now as we're talking, I'm still kind of figuring it out.
Cool. So the last thing kind of to touch upon mainly is your other game, which was already kickstarted, but it hasn't been released yet, I think. Why?
The PDF is out.
Oh, okay.
I've released the PDF just a couple days ago.
Okay.
I'm waiting. Here's the thing. The whole inside of the book and the PDF, everything's fine. There was a problem with something on the back cover of the soft cover and the hard cover. I have received the soft cover proof that fixed it. So everything's good on the soft cover. I'm waiting on the stupid hard cover as we talk. So I decided, I'm pretty sure the hardcover is going to be fixed because the soft cover was. It was the same problem for both books. So I decided to go ahead and get the PDF into people's hands for the weekend so that if they wanted to play this weekend, they could. And I will get the discount links off to everybody for those who want to buy a book as soon as the hardcover gets the thumbs up.
Cool. So for those in the future, you may be able to buy even the physical copy, but definitely the PDF is already out. So we are talking, which we haven't even mentioned the name of the game we were talking about, of Die Laughing, which is, tell us a little bit about it.
Die Laughing is a horror comedy game. It's short. It's a short play. It plays in just a couple hours. No GM. Everybody plays a character in a horror comedy movie, and everybody's going to die. Maybe there'll be a survivor. One. And the game is set up to basically everybody kind of plays archetypes. You can set up very quickly. It's very zero prep kind of thing. You pick a character, make a couple choices, pick a monster, and get some dice, and you go. And the game guides you through sort of an act 1, act 2, act 3 structure for a movie with scenes and suggestions, and it just kind of tells you how to role play things out, and you make some trait checks, some rolls, and And you've got a pool of dice that you're rolling, and that dice pool is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And when you run out of dice, your character dies.
So, yeah. So, what do you wanted to make like a comedy horror story game?
Well, the initial thought on it was, this will get me back to a little bit more. There's a little bit more to know about the game. Was the problem with a lot of horror games, if it's a game where characters are going to die, is what do you do when your character dies? If you want the threat of death to really be there, well, now my character dies. Now what? So I decided, make this horror comedy so that you kind of want your character to die, so that you can have fun and have a funny death scene. And then I built it as the movie, like the idea that you're making a movie allows then when your character is gone, you become a producer on the movie, and you continue to influence the story from afar. You get points that you can spend to do different things to kind of mess around with everybody else that's still left in the story. And as the story goes along, more and more characters die. And by the time you're getting toward the end, there's a lot of producers, and they're all screwing with the story. And so the last few players are constantly having to readjust to what the producers are causing to happen. And it becomes kind of a free for all. And then eventually, maybe one character survives. Sometimes everybody dies. It was an attempt to create a horror story game where you had something to do. Even if your character died, and it didn't punish you for having your character die.
I guess that's...
just a note, I've got players that have played it multiple times, and a few of them will do everything they can to get their character dead as quickly as possible because they love being the producer. Because you get to mess with everybody else, and there's nothing anybody can do to you.
So I think you partly answered that, but how does the game balance that horror comedy elements, which can be a little bit hard to
Yeah. Well, every character archetype, it's like they're the classic horror archetypes. You've got like the high school kid types. There's the jock and the cheerleader and the stoner, and then there's the cop and the soldier and the parent, and then there's some weird ones like the crazy scientist. And there's an archetype called the person who knows they're in a movie.
That's immediately the one I would.
I just played a game with somebody playing that one recently, and there's one called the Monster's Helper. So if you know Dracula, there's Renfield, who kind of is always wanting to help Dracula. So you can play that character, and then all the monsters are just a little bit ridiculous. They're all kind of plays off of they're spins, they're spoofs on classic horror movie monsters. So there's a slasher type character, and there's a blob type character or a monster, and there's a sexy vampire, and there's some weird zombies, and they're all just a little ridiculous, so that they're inherently kind of weird. Like the zombies are called erudite zombies. They are British and proper, but they eat your brain.
Nice. So I think we are kind of getting towards the end of the interview.
Oh no!
I mean, it's not like we have a fixed time, but I don't want to take too much of your time. So there's always a couple of things I like to kind of finish on. First one is to kind of, because I think generally our mistakes are when we learn the most. What were some issues in terms of designing a game or anything else, but kind of problems or issues or things that you found? An example, some problem you found in the development of a game. How did you approach solving it, and how did you solve it? So,
oh boy, I think most of the and I don't know if their problems are the right word, but most of the issues that I run into, the ones that the things that I start questioning, usually get solved by good play testers. Because when you're designing a game, you get very close to it, and it's your thing. You're passionate about it. You love this game like it is. You designed it to be this way, and then a play tester says, that doesn't work. Capers, I had some play testers that they picked out the problem powers and descriptions that were an issue. There was, for example, there was in there's a power that's called dimensional pocket, where you can create this extra dimensional space to put stuff in. It's like a bag of holding. And then there's another power where you can create acid, and there's no limit on it. You can just keep dribbling out acid. So you could take that pocket, fill it halfway up with acid, make the pocket big, and throw people in it and just kill them. And so I had to change that power because I don't want instant kills in the game. I had to change that power to be that you can only put non-living things in there. So, there's stuff that I missed. There was a power that I had that was effectively gave you infinite money. I was like, oh, you're playing gangsters that are trying to get rich, and you take this power and boom, you're rich. And I was like, man, that's no good. And then, there were things that I did with Murders and Acquisitions, which that game is a little all over the place. It's got the modern day thing, and then it's got all these add-on things. And at the time, I thought it was a very good idea, and I think it mostly works. But it's also, the game feels disjointed because of it. It feels like there's all this stuff in there that's it maybe feels like a little bit of an afterthought to some people. It's not as focused. And I think that, I took that, and going into Capers, that became more focused. I was like, okay, I'm going to do the game that does this thing. I'll put a little bit of optional stuff in there, but I'm not going to have half the book be optional. It's all about, gangsters in the 1920s with superpowers. And then furthermore, when I got to Die Laughing, then that was even more specific. It's like, here's a game that does a very specific thing. It kills your characters off and makes it funny. The dice mechanic only does two things. You roll your dice, and it tells you whether you succeed or fail in the scene, and it gets you closer to death. So it was. I think I've learned a fair bit about focusing a game and making it a little bit more cohesive, and it does the thing it's supposed to do better.
Nice. I think that's a really good advice. The other one I asked is if you could tell us a short story from one of your playtests, maybe Capers Noir, or for example, since that one is going to come out soon, that's kind of like just cool, or the one that comes to mind right now, or that you think is a good representation of the game, really just so we get an idea of the game.
Sure. There's an adventure for Capers that you can buy. It's called One Busy Night. The setup is that you're playing gangsters, and the characters are running a club that has multiple floors, and it has a lot of different things going on in it. And without giving away what's going on, there's a lot of different encounters of different things, of all these different things that are happening in the club on this one busy night. There's a loudmouth drunk. There's somebody who's cheating at cards. There's somebody who's out for revenge on a spurned lover. There's all these different things that are kind of happening all at the same time. There's like 6 or 7 of them. And I've played it multiple times, and I've managed a couple of times to get enough of these little scenes going and split the party up completely. Like, this person is dealing with that person is dealing with that, and they're all alone. And then I let something really hit the fan for one of them. And that person suddenly has to panic and deal with whatever the problem is. And it makes everybody else panic. Am I the next one who's going to have everything blow up in his face? So I need to get this thing, the problem I'm dealing with, I've got to get this dealt with right now. And then as they deal with their problems, then you slowly can bring the characters sort of back together. And by the end, they've gotten through the night. And I that's one of my favorite adventures to run, because it's tough to follow sometimes, because you have to kind of keep track of who's doing what. But it can get really chaotic and tense.
Nice. Cool. So I just sent the links to Craig's stuff on the chat, and I'll put them on the description of the video as well. So definitely check those out if you're interested. And if you want to support our channel as well, as I said before, you can either subscribe on YouTube, Twitch, follow us on social media. We are everywhere, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Google Plus, but that's going to die. I know MeWe, if you are for some reason into that. I know if you want to give us some financial support, you can become like a subscriber in Twitch, or give us a small donation on coffee, which I'll send the link on the chat right now as well. And so yeah, and I just want to say thank you, Craig, for being with us today. It was a lot of fun having you.
Thank you, Angel. I had a great time. It was a lot of fun.
And if you like it, for the spectators, feel free to share the video around, and as I said, check Craig's stuff as well. And I think that's going to be all for us today. Thanks a lot for everyone for being here. I hope you liked it. And as I always say, live long and prosper. May the force be with you. And I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.